Productive Pastor 72, using task layers to plan your week. What's going on, friends? Welcome to episode 72. We're talking about task layers. This is a great idea that I thought about over the week as we chase that perfect ministry schedule. So many times over in Productive Pastor Community, our private Facebook group, you will find people asking questions about what does your weekly schedule look like, all those sorts of things. And here's the deal. If you're waiting on what the perfect ministry schedule might be like, my friend, you're going to be waiting a little bit. I don't think it exists. I really don't. I think one of the best skills that we can learn in ministry is how to anticipate our weeks, but how to also be responsive and proactive when things get a little squirrely. So we're talking about a strategy to understand that in this episode. Two fun announcements that I am stoked to let you know about. Number one, the Trello course goes live tomorrow on Friday, September the 22nd. You can go to TrelloForMinistry.com, or you can chase the links that you will find me broadcasting all over the internet. There will be a special introductory price for the course. It's $99. That price is going to last for a couple of weeks until it goes up to what will be its permanent price. But in it, there's 4 modules. There's probably 3 hours of video content. There's templates. There's all sorts of things. You know, Trello is my answer for just about everything. So go to TrelloForMinistry.com on Friday, and you can pick that up. We'll probably go live around noon, sometime like that. So second thing is, are you getting the Productive Pastor emails? I write these every single week. There's a monthly topic that we drill down into more and more. This month, we've been talking about ministry complexity and how to understand that as a pastor. Just invite you to come hang out with that. You can find links to all those things in the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/072. So let's jump into the main conversation today, using task layers to plan your week. So how do you plan your ministry week? Solid question. Really solid question. People ask it all the time. And there's been some blog posts that are older that come up, and you see some really, really serious, significant things. And the best one I've found, I see it come up every 6 months or so. It's all about really finding the time to do your sermon preparation. But it's assuming, 20, 25 hours. I think it's dated enough. I know for certain it's pre-COVID. But it might be a 10 or a 15-year-old article out there. I'll be honest with you, my friends. It's not really that accessible or relevant anymore. I'll try to find the link to that. I'll post it in the show notes if I can find the link to it. But I love it. It's a great idea. I just know from coaching tons of pastors, from talking with folks, from seeing these sorts of things, that it's just not realistic whatsoever at all. And so let's think about, how do you plan out a ministry week? The conundrum that exists there if you're serving a normal-sized church. And I talk about normal-sized churches all the time. It's one of my catchphrases now, but a normal-sized church, realistically, the median-sized church in the United States now is 60 people. I'm going to call a normal-sized church between 50 and 125. Now, I know we've got folks that listen to the show that serve churches larger than that and churches smaller than that, but this is more so what I'm thinking about. What does it mean if you were the only full-time employee at your church? I know of churches that are significantly larger than 125 where the pastor is the only full-time employee. I would say that's the indicator for what I would call a normal-sized church. And if you're the only full-time employee, or there's maybe 2 of you, and then also depending on your denominational tradition, like I will tell you this right now, about 75% of my coaching is in Methodist pastors. And I will tell you what, the Methodist pastors have significantly more administrative responsibilities than my friends that are Baptists, that are non-denominational, that sort of thing, especially. And I'm still thinking as to why that is. But, if you're trying to plan out this ministry schedule, it has to be fluid. Time management can be difficult. So what would happen if you really did learn to build your week for responsiveness? Now, all of these questions are questions that come up tons of times in productivity conversations in ministry. But I think this idea of task layering is beginning to help me understand this. So if you cruise the show notes, there'll be an image there where I show a little bit about why I'm calling this task layering, because really I think we can break up ministry tasks into 3 layers, 3 zones. And there's a 4th one that is unrelated I'll talk about at the back end of the episode. So what we're going to do is I'm going to explain these layers, why I think these layers matter, and then we're going to answer 2 questions. How can you craft your week with this strategy? And then the second, how can you use this strategy to recover if something goes crazy? So first of all, with these layers, I see 3 layers that help us to understand how our tasks work. We have small layers, we have medium layers, and we have big layers. And I get you're saying, okay, Chad, that just sounds a little bit easy, a little bit too silly. And, some of this stuff we've talked about before. A lot of this has shown up in other places inside of Productive Pastor content and the Becoming Productive course, those sorts of things. But I'm beginning to understand how we can have this vision of stacking these things on top of it. This pays attention to the idea of time blocking, that sort of thing, but also a fluidity that has to come through any productivity strategy that folks in ministry are going to align with. So the layers, the first layer is your small tasks. Now, this is going to be the widest one because it covers the widest amount of information. This is the top layer on an upside down wedding cake of time management, because context switching is something inside of the small task layer that is not just going to happen, but it needs to be expected. In many ways, the small task layer is where you put all of the things in which you can context switch quickly. If you have a checklist of 20 tiny little small items that are going to take 30 seconds to a minute and a half, 2 minutes to accomplish, chaining all of those together is a perfect example of when you're living in this small layer moment. Your focus when you're in the small task layer is on doing. Your focus should be, I'm getting stuff done. These are very, very specific actions of what's going on here. These should be things that you can do when you're not just not at your best. These should be the kind of things that you should be able to do regardless of what your energy and especially your emotional level is. I can clean up the church database no matter how bad of a mood I am in. I can do some calendar management, that sort of stuff, no matter what. I can run some templates and update church events, that kind of stuff. All of those sorts of things. These are this qualification of the small task layer. It's a bunch of stuff, small things to do. I talk about tiny, huge tasks, or tiny little things that have huge consequences. This falls in here too. So just because it's small doesn't mean it's important, but these are 1 and 2 step action things that you can do. That's the small task layer. Like I said, imagine an upside down wedding cake. There'll be some drawings and stuff on the social about this, but this is the top layer, the big, wide. That's the irony of this is it's the widest layer, but it is the narrowest in its impact because these tasks just don't take much time. Now, the second layer is the medium layer. Context switching might happen here, but think of those things that you need to do that might take 20 to 30 minutes. You're not creating anything brand new here. That's another kind of a qualification I like to put on this. But this is where you're doing editing for things, or this is where you're making your sermon slides. You can context switch here. This is the kind of stuff I imagine when I was working in an office, the secretary would come and knock on the door and say, hey, when you come to a stopping place, if this is the kind of thing where, oh yeah, I'll be there in 10 minutes. That's a great example of what a medium layer task looks like. Medium layer tasks, you might have 2 or 3 things that you could knock out in a block of time, and you can call those a medium task layer. Planning your sermon calendar, working on the church bulletin, this stuff that needs you to be okay. You need to be able to pay attention to it. It's the kind of thing that you can't do from your phone while you're waiting at the doctor's office. That's another good indicator there. You can do the small stuff from anywhere with your phone. Medium, you got to be sitting down, have a tablet in hand maybe. But you can knock out a couple of 3 of these over the course of an hour or 2 hours. The last layer is the large layer. Now remember, upside down wedding cake. This is going to be deep but narrow. When you are in the large layer, you are focused on one thing. You're just doing one thing and one thing only. It could be a multi-process piece, but this is where you're not focused on doing, you're focused on creating. This is first draft territory. This is you at your best. This is when you're aware of your schedule, when you're aware of the time of the day, the whole 9 yards. This is what Cal Newport calls deep work, the whole 9 yards. Context switching can absolutely not happen when you're inside of the large layer. This is about having very specific, intentional, and deliberate focus. The large layer is so important for so many folks in ministry because this is where sermon preparation gets done. Now, what's wild is if you think about sermon preparation, I'm going on a rabbit trail right here, no script, just off the cuff, Chad thoughts right here. There are certain parts of sermon preparation that fall into each one of these layers. And only you know what can do what. I can read commentaries and take notes when I am in a really, really frantic, scattered state and can still get a lot of stuff done. So there's pieces of sermon preparation for me can very easily be into the small layer. And what's so funny is it's stuff that most people would not assume would be inside of the small layer. But for me, it can live in the small layer. When I am doing big drawn out stuff, thinking about sermon outline, that sort of stuff, this needs to happen inside of the large layer. When I'm doing exegesis work, it needs to happen inside of that large layer. So things have very specific layers they can live into. We've talked before about tasks. We've talked before about types of tasks, all this, but it's this idea of layering that helps me understand stuff. And what's so funny is what I've noticed is whatever I do at the very beginning of the day is going to be the largest layer. And as I cruise through my day, and really and truly, if I divide my day into mornings and afternoons, I'm going to follow a very kind of specific tiered approach to this, almost always ending with the small layer because of focus, energy, all those sorts of things. So that's the idea of layers. That's what layers mean. So let's move on to, so what do we do with this idea, Chad? First question, I told y'all, how can you craft your week with this strategy? I think the first thing is to realize how many of these do you need each week? And it's where I struggle with the idea of finding the perfect ministry schedule. The reason I don't think the perfect ministry schedule exists is our lives are way too fluid now, depending on what your context is. You're going to need different ones of these for whatever ministry looks like in the season you're in and for what the week looks like. If you go back, and there's 3 episodes I did on reviews, on a Sunday preview, a Monday review, and an end of week review. Or it was a Sunday review, a Thursday review, and end of day review. There's a whole block of episodes. There's a link to the show notes to that playlist on Spotify. You can listen to them. But so much of that talks about being able to step and say, okay, this is what I need to do this week. I've been cramming to get the Trello course done for the last 2 or 3 weeks. That means I am leaving tons of block in my schedule for at least medium-sized layers and occasionally some large layers. That's how I've been planning my week. I've been saying no to so many other things, and I've also been telling myself, Chad, don't worry about that, Chad. Don't focus on that, Chad. That can wait a couple of weeks. That sort of thing, because I know this is the biggest thing I have to get done. So I've been planning my week schedule in light of that. And I've only been in the office 2 to 3 days a week on average for the last month because I've been traveling for my responsibilities as the congregational strategist for the Louisiana Conference of the Methodist Church. So when you sit down with these reviews, that's when you can ask yourself the question, okay, this is what my week looks like. These are my priorities. These are where my layers are going to fall into things. So if you know, besides the sermon, you also have a couple of other big, huge things that are going to need creativity and are going to need singular focus, then you need to look at your schedule and say, do I have the ability to put 4 large task layers or 5 large task layers in my week? Do I have enough space now to put some small layers for the little incidental things that are going to happen? Can I move things around, and can I imagine and dream this up in a way that's going to let me accomplish what I want to do, what I applied intention to? Because this can change every single week. Now, thinking back about how you can maybe stack or stagger layers with each other inside of those morning and afternoon blocks, I think very, very rarely can you attach a large block to a medium block. Sometimes I can do this, but I have to be at a definitive known stopping point in a large task layer to say, okay, I'm going to move into medium stuff now. Because remember, it's the context switching. When I move into medium work, I might not just be doing less detailed sermon work or less detailed development work. It's me saying, okay, I'm willing to do some maybe more administrative side of this development work, and then to go run off and take care of this sort of thing that's completely unrelated. Now, medium and small, I can occasionally, and pretty frequently occasionally, can stack those on top of each other. It's not odd for me to have a layer of small tasks, then do a medium layer, medium type work for a while, and then finish off with another small, especially in an afternoon where I don't have coaching calls scheduled. That's kind of how it typically tends to fall. The second question that we asked, the fourth thing that changes is this, because we've not talked about all this because I don't feel like these fall into a layer description. But in church, we have meetings. And the reason I bring up meetings is you need to be scheduling your meetings to understand that in light of this whole layered approach, realizing that if you schedule a meeting at 10:30 on a morning, that means you ain't going to be putting no large layer in the middle of that morning as well. That means you might be having a medium and a small, or vice versa, or just a bunch of small or whatever like that. Those meetings change everything. So plan around your meetings, but also be aware of what the meeting is and the energy level you're going to have as you come out of that meeting. For me, regardless of how good the meeting is, most of the time I come out of it brain tired. So I'm going to have to go into a layer of small tasks just because my brain is done. Now, sometimes I'll come out of it and it's like all aboard the hustle bus, but that's maybe 5 to 10% of the time now. When I was younger, it was very, very different. So think about how your meetings affect your ability to think, to do, all that sort of stuff. The second question is this: how can we use this to recover? Now, I had the exact situation I needed to talk about happen to me this week. Woke up, first phone call at 9:15 in the morning. I was settling into a nice long block, a large task layer of sermon preparation work. I get a phone call from somebody I work with in the conference office. Takes priority. I take the phone call. I find out what's going on. We chat for 30, 45 minutes. Come off of that, kind of pitter around for a little bit, trying to get back to save myself a little bit. Get another phone call, another coworker. Next thing I know, what I had scheduled out as an 8 to 12 layer turns into, I've got about an hour and 15 minutes left before lunch, and I got a hard 1 o'clock. So I know that 12 o'clock is a pretty hard boundary as well. So what I had to realize to do is, okay, let's move into a small task layer. Now, I had planned a bunch of small and medium stuff for the afternoon, and when I looked back at what I had to do, I said, you know what? I can very easily just come on, just start cranking stuff out, crank out a bunch of small ball for the next hour and 15 minutes. When I come off my coaching call at 2, I've got 3.5 hours I can devote to sermon preparation. And that coaching call, I knew who it was with, what it was going to be about. It was going to leave me in a state of mind to where I could quickly try to throw myself into the headspace I needed to be with a large layer. Now, that's because of what time it was. It happened to be at 1, and it happened to be with the person I knew where I was going to be after that call as well. But this layered strategy, it allows you to be so much more responsive than just having this massive to-do list in front of you. I feel like I've been talking for 2 years about an energy-based approach to how we handle our schedules. And since I have begun to understand these things in terms of layers, what I have found is it makes my own adaptability and responsiveness that's part of my ministry situation, makes it a lot easier, makes it a lot more just appropriate for me. I've said in a lot of places, I think productivity, you're either an engineer or you're an artist. And I'm learning more and more and more. I approach productivity like an artist. It's there. It's real. You might be an engineer, kind of jealous. You probably have a lot better of a Notion database set up than I do. But let me know what you think about task layers. Hit me up on all the socials at Rev Chad Brooks. You can comment on this episode thread on Productive Pastor Community. Y'all, Trello course comes out tomorrow, TrelloForMinistry.com. You can also catch the show notes for this episode, RevChadBrooks.com/PPP/072. And I'll see you back next week. Thanks for letting me in your ears for yet another episode of Productive Pastor.